Hello, Lisa here. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time. Listen, if this is your first time, I'm going to tell you right now, this is probably not the video you want to start with. This is going to be very long and very special interest. So let me say right out the gate, if you missed my initial live stream where I spoke about the ways in which I am charting my own spiritual path, the ways in which I am in some ways coming full circle, but mostly deconstructing and reconstructing old paths to spirituality I experienced when I was young. I'm going to be talking a lot of God stuff, a lot of Bible stuff, a lot of that kind of thing. This is definitely not everybody's cup of tea, but for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, this is an area of special interest. This is very personalized to me. This is not something where I'm exploring something that I'm being told how to believe, but very much a path of my own making. In fact, it's kind of funny. I've seen some people, I want to say Candy Soul and Soil did a video, and I think I've seen other people do this where they sort of create their own syllabus of literature. You could kind of see this like that, except for me, this is sort of me designing my own faith study as I have been called to revisit beliefs from my past, but in through a new lens. So this is all very Bible-y, but again, very open spiritually. When I talk about my faith journey, if you want the background for this and this exploration, you will want to watch the live stream I did, which I will link down below. It'll be the first link you see. I'm probably not going to link anything else in this video because if I do, it will take me forever. But I will show everything I'm talking about. But in this, I'm going to be sharing a little bit of an update. I've been doing this now for a while, so I'm going to share a little bit of an update. I'm also going to go over every resource that I have accumulated during this journey, and it's a lot. So I did ask if people wanted to see this. I had quite a few people saying they were interested in this. I've also been asked if I wanted to put this on a separate channel, and while I totally get that, and if I ever decide to make content frequently about this, in a really in-depth way, I would probably do that. But frankly, I don't want to attract people who are less open-minded into this space around this topic, because this, again, is a very highly personalized and much more open and deconstructed view of these things than you will typically find on the internet. And so I don't want to attract. That's why I'm careful about which words I use in the title and in the thumbnail, because I don't want to attract. I'm not here to debate. I'm not here to debate beliefs. I'm not here to debate spiritualities. I think all paths are beautiful, and I think we pretty much all, for the most part, are following similar paths with different trappings. And so this is something that feels very much like home to me, but in a way that I am reclaiming. And it's been an incredibly empowering journey and really beautiful for me personally, but I do not expect other people to get this. And particularly, I'm very, very, very cautious about a lot of the dogmatic stuff that's out in the world, because most of that I don't align with. So this is a highly, highly personalized thing. That said, if you have religious trauma, I get you. I've been there. If you have, I have talked much more openly and personally and deeply about my own past experiences, but I've gone through plenty in that category, and so I have no interest in that kind of exclusionary thinking. I'm very inclusive in the way that I'm going about this journey, and it's very, like I said, open, it's expansive in its scope, and I'm discovering some really incredible things along the way that it's just brought me closer and closer to feeling like I have a relationship with the divine, with deity, and while I might name that God, it is, to me, nothing has shifted about my beliefs. And if anything, my beliefs have deepened, as they always have been. It's hard to describe, but I go into it in a lot more detail in a much more cohesive way in my first video, because I really planned that video out, like that live stream, and I went over all the points. But the key things I try to let people know when I dive into this topic is, number one, I don't expect y'all to watch this if this is not your bag. This is just for those who have expressed interest. And number two, and most importantly, I like to say I am not going all Doreen Virtue. I think people worry about that. There's been a lot of that that's happened specifically in these spaces before. We've seen several people kind of go down this path, and then they're either never heard from again, or they get very icky about their past beliefs. I'm not there. That's not even, I don't see a realm in which that's possible, because my tarot practice is absolutely intertwined. My spirituality is absolutely intertwined with all of this. There's no taking this piece and saying this is evil and this is good. That's not happening for me. So I don't give it. Once you see how deep I've gone and the fact that I'm still not there, I hope that will give any reassurance to those of you who are concerned about that. I get it. I've seen it happen. It's why I was so hesitant to share about this for a long time, but we are here, and this is where I'm at. So my last video, or I should say my first video in this, I'll call it a series because I may every once in a while post an update and I'll park it under this theming. But charting my spiritual path, my first one was about a year ago. And at that time, I had already been exploring these topics for quite some time. So I think I'm approaching 2 full years now of like regular, consistent study and practice in this topic. I, in that time, have accumulated a lot of resources, gone down many rabbit holes, but I guess that's about the timeline. And I will say that at this point, I feel like I have a very close relationship with God. I feel like I'm very intimately familiar and have reconnected with my original relationship I had with the figure of Jesus. And these things can be, like I said, very hard to articulate, but because it's so personal, it's a very intimate relationship. I'm not talking like other people telling me what to believe. Again, that's very important. So today what I'm going to be covering is we're going to talk about Bible translations because that's been huge for me in this study and in learning how. I feel like I'm very disorganized in this video. Bear with me. It's been a month. I'm going to talk about translations because that was sort of my gateway into this. I'm also going to share my full collection of reading Bibles, study Bibles, different translations, resources that are for study, books that have helped me, books I have still to read, but that are in my area of interest. So this is going to be a massive show and tell kind of video. And hopefully in that I can share some things, but there are a few disclaimers. I feel like I've given so many disclaimers, but there's more. Number one, I'm not an expert on this topic. If you are interested in learning more about Bible translation specifically, there are tons of really great videos that will break down sort of the lineage of those transitions. I will tell you the bits I remember, but don't assume I am 100% accurate on everything because while I'm studying and I feel like my retention's pretty good when I have a special interest, I probably will get some things wrong. I will also say that if this is an area of interest for you and you're considering dipping in, the one piece of advice I would give is start cautiously, start slowly, and figure out why the interest, and maybe lean into things that support that reason. So I had a lot of very specific goals at the beginning, and it has shifted and morphed over time, and now it's like I'm just like hungry for all of it. But in the beginning, I had very specific things I was looking for, and as those goals were met, and as I began to deconstruct and reconstruct those concepts, and I'll talk about some of those today, but as I began to do that, then the scope began to widen. I'm like interested in even more, and like, oh, what about this over here, and what about that? And one thing I will say is this: there's a lot of, I will say, harmful. I'm not going to say bad. Well, no, I'll say bad. There's a lot of bad and harmful interpretations of the Bible out in the world, either through different religious denominations, people who are using it to justify just heinous behavior or attitudes or discriminations, or, I mean, the list goes on and on. There's a ton of harm. But within the soup that is that, which is all I thought there was for a long, long time, I have found so many incredible people doing really powerful, progressive work in this area and really making me realize, I guess, that just because there are bad interpretations and harmful applications of these topics doesn't mean that the source material, so many things are taken out of context. And I think when you give yourself the permission to explore in a way that feels right for you, you can explore in ways that lead you to what you're trying to find. And I think one of the things I've learned the most is that if you're looking for bad, you're going to find it. And if you're looking for good, you're going to find it. If you're looking for objectivity, then the sources, you have to form that yourself. Like you kind of have to go into the source material and pay attention to how you're exploring it and let that be your guide. And that will change your experience. So I've got some resources that will give you a good jumping off point if that's something that you're interested in doing. And I feel like I'm all over the place and I don't know where to start. But I think what I'm going to start is the book that held my hand in beginning the journey of just cracking a Bible in the first place. And that is this one. I've talked about this before. This is called Reading the Bible Again for the First Time. This is by Marcus J. Borg. Marcus J. Borg is an incredible author, I would say quite progressive. To frame this, I don't know if we have like a bio. Here we go. So Marcus J. Borg passed in 2015. Marcus J. Borg was a pioneering author and teacher whom the New York Times described as a leading figure in the generation of Jesus scholars. He was the Hundeer Distinguished Professor of Religion and Culture at Oregon State University and Canon Theology at Trinity Episcopal Cathedral in Portland. And he appeared on NBC's The Today Show and Dateline. I haven't seen any of these. ABC's World News and NPR's Fresh Air. His books have sold over 1 million copies, including the best-selling Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time, which I have here. At the heart of Christianity, the God we never knew, Jesus, evolution of the word, speaking Christian, and convictions. So this just caught my attention because of the title, if I'm being honest. I was looking, I went through reading reviews and stuff, but the title caught me first, and then I read about it, and I was like, okay, this is a good place for me to start. But it says taking the Bible seriously, but not literally. And what I love about this, let's just start here. Many Christians mistakenly believe that their only choice is either to reconcile themselves to a fundamentalist reading of Scripture, a literal factual approach, or to simply reject the Bible as something that could bring meaning and value into their lives. In reading the Bible again for the first time, Marcus Borg shows how instead we can freshly appreciate all the essential elements of the Old and New Testament from Genesis to Revelation in a way that can open up a new world of intelligent faith. In reading the Bible again for the first time, Borg reveals how it is possible to reconcile a scientific and critical way of thinking with our deepest spiritual needs, leading to an insightful experience of the ancient text. This unique book invites every reader, whatever his or her religious background, to engage the Bible, to wrestle with its meaning, to explore its mysteries, and to understand its relevance. So this shows how to encounter the Bible in a fresh new way that rejects the limits of simple literalism and opens up the rich possibility of living a life of authentic faith. Now, I began here, and the place that really sold me on this was chapter 1, reading lenses. This is like, if I was to say there's one thing that will transform if you are going to dive into the Bible, especially if you have a lot of like icky feelings about Christianity or the Bible, but this is an area of interest for you, this idea of different lenses is a solid theological way to look at the text. And basically it's different. We don't just read text and like take it at face value 90% of the time. We always bring some sort of lens to our reading. And so this talks about the type of lens you can bring and how they conflict and how different lenses will give you a different experience. So it talks about the conflict. He really addresses like where different lenses can create problematic readings. But what I like this says, once the Bible was routinely bound as a single volume, it became easier to think of it as a single book with a single author, namely God. But this is not true. The Bible is a collection of many, many smaller books authored by many different people, and the canon of the Bible and the way that it was put together is much more complicated than I was ever taught. And as I've like dug into Bible scholarship and learned more about that, I understand that there's a lot of hot debate about who wrote what and which books, and each book has a different sort of literary construct. Some are meant to be more historical, some are meant to be literary and more poetic. So there's the wisdom books, there's the books of the law, there's the history books, there's the poetic books, and and the prophetic books. Each book had each style of book leaned into a different literary construct of its time. So culture matters, context matters, etc., etc. Anyway, so he talks about some of the problematic, I think, ways of reading the Bible. And then talks about historical and cultural relativity, modernity. How do you say that word? Modernity? Anyways, I'm not going to go this deep into every book or we'll be here literally 17 hours. Anyway, one of the things that I found really helpful, oh my God, there's so much good stuff in here. Okay. This is a summary. I've shared this before, I'm pretty sure. But here's what he says. There's no such thing as a non-interpretive reading of the Bible, unless our reading consists simply of making sounds in the air. As we read the Bible, then we should ask not what is God saying, but what is the ancient author or community saying? This was transformative to me because, and this is why my very first study Bible was a cultural context or a cultural backgrounds study Bible, because the idea was I needed to know the context and the history of the culture of the time, because so much of what we read is influenced by mythologies that were being told from similar cultures in that area. There's a lot of Babylonian culture and mythology that finds its way into the Bible, at least from, again, don't take anything I say as stone cold fact, look into anything yourself, but there's a lot of that kind of stuff. Here's another piece that I really liked. Christians find the disclosure of God not because the Bible is the words of God, but because the Bible contains the primary stories and traditions that disclose the character and will of God. That is very, very interesting because a lot of times what I found, now that I've pretty much read the whole thing, I'm just at the very end. I'm into the I shouldn't say I'm at the very end. The New Testament is really just a small bit compared to the rest of it. I'm reading the New Testament now, but I've read the entire Old Testament word for word, and have read, I'm doing a deep dive study into the book of John right now. That's currently where I'm at. And I've read the book of Matthew. I'm about halfway through the book of Mark. And then I've got Acts and letters and things to read. But I've done studies into I've already done a bunch of New Testament study in other ways. So I'm reading it, but I'm already fairly familiar with its contents. So having read the entire thing and not just like taking bits and pieces or verses that have been misused and whatever, hurled about, what I've discovered is that there's a very, very clear progression, and what happens and how everything unfolds seems to me to point very, very obviously and very clearly to human failing, and like the ways, not that we're all bad. That's a whole other derail that I could get down. But what I have found is this idea that like there's nobody's perfect, and like there's this like constant reiteration of like people who maybe mean well but then end up doing really bad things, or maybe they don't mean well and they just do really, really bad things. And there's a lot of exposure in the Bible that I think I wasn't expecting to see. I think I was expecting to see a lot of like, oh, these people believed in God, therefore they were amazing, and that's not really how it's written. And there's a lot of like, this person screwed up, and then this person screwed up, and then these people screwed up, and it's like constantly this constant story of like, but there's this redeeming story that happens throughout the whole thing, and that's a whole spiritual thread that I'm going to try not to go down. But I'll just say that in some of my sort of theological side questing, I found out that at least what rings true for me is that a lot of the purpose is to actually expose the pattern, the human pattern of constantly harming each other and crapping on each other and treating each other unkindly and subjugating each other, and like power and the ways that it corrupts and all these kinds of things. And then we get this figure in the form of Jesus who shows up in the New Testament, who's there to sort of correct the misinterpretation of God, the way that people thought, oh, I've got to do this, God wants me to sacrifice, and God wants me to do all this stuff. And then you find out, oh, actually, no, that's not the case. Actually, no, this is what this character of this divine being is like. And it's represented by this human who is here to show, like, this is what it's supposed to be. You guys are getting it all wrong. Here, let me show you. And I think with that lens, which has a lot to do with sort of diving deeper into the Jesus story, which not everybody's going to be comfortable with. That's actually a bridge too far for a lot of folks, and I totally get that. That's where my relationship began, so that's where I was most comfortable. You guys, I've shown you one book. We're 20 minutes in. So anyway, there's a lot in here that will, I think, unpack the ways in which you can misuse, take things out of context, harm, use these words, these stories, these legends, histories, myths, however you view them, in a harmful way to justify anything you want. If you take something out of context, where there's so much text, if you take a chunk out of context, you can use it to justify anything, and that's abominable. That's horrible. You can also take sometimes the exact same text. That's what they call proof texts, where you take pieces of text and go, see, this is why this is okay, or this is why this is wrong. And that's not how it's, I feel, meant to be read. I feel like it's meant to look at, you're meant to look at a meta-narrative, you're meant to look at an entire story and to kind of see this overarching themes that run through the whole thing. And when we take just bits and pieces and parts and pick and choose to our liking, we miss that bigger, broader narrative. And anyways, there's a lot of that in here. Oh my God. Anyways, this takes you through the entire thing. There's a ton of really great resources. I've highlighted the crap out of it. I flagged it where he's talking about the prophets or Proverbs or the book of Job or the Pentateuch, which is history, when he's talking about by history, I mean they're considered historical books, even though they're not scientific history necessarily. There's some historical bits in there, but they've, it's colloquialized, I'll say. There's creation stories in here, and he talks through sort of how to parse this stuff, I think partly with like a modern lens. Anyway, he also authored this book. I'm gonna have to keep going quicker than I am now. This is Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time, which actually came out before this one, but this is really about the historical Jesus, the heart of contemporary faith. Again, if you're looking for a progressive introduction to biblical texts that are going to, I think, be very affirming and give you permission to sort of find your way in a way that is helpful and not harmful, I feel like this is a really, really good place to start. So highly recommend this one because it was super, super helpful. Okay, I had to go look at my Kindle because there's like a few things in my Kindle that were also super, super helpful that I read quite a bit ago. Okay, so I did read, another book by him is called The God We Never Knew. That was a shorter read. It was quite good. I read the entire thing. That was really good. John Shelby Spong. If you want to heal relentless trauma, if you want to be introduced to somebody who I think understands the heart of what the good news is supposed to be about and what the gospel is really meant to be about, what can be actually healing and beautiful, it's John Shelby Spong. You can find, if you go on YouTube and you look up Bishop John Shelby Spong, look up any talk by him, look for the ones with the most views. I cried the first time I watched a John Shelby Spong talk, because he really challenges church dogma. He really challenges the ways in which Christianity can be so harmful. And then he also points out the beauty and the power in a more expansive reading of text and what that could do. But this book is called Unbelievable, and it says why neither ancient creeds nor the Reformation can produce a living faith today. So he's also the author of a book called Why Christianity Must Change or Die. Anyway, this book was really good. I will read anything he writes. He's not as captivating a reader as some other people I have in my stack, but as a speaker, he healed something in me that was so broken, and I'm so grateful to him. I loved this book so much, but I really like his speeches, honestly, most of all. Another resource that helped me in the same vein as this. So again, this is like how to read it, how to explore the Bible. If this is something you're interested in getting into, really recommend this one. The second book that I recommend the most, and it's actually also pretty entertaining, this is the book, How the Bible Actually Works, in which I explain how an ancient, ambiguous, and diverse book leads us to wisdom rather than answers, and why that's great news. Peter Enns. He is the author of The Bible Tells Me So. He's the co-host of the Bible for Normal People podcast, which I really love. And the first couple dozen episodes of that podcast were also incredible for me. I still listen to it. I don't listen to every single episode because there's hundreds, but it's really, really, really good. Again, a very progressive look at the Bible. But this book, How the Bible Actually Works, and this book, Reading the Bible Again for the First Time, were probably my two initial guides through the text. They really helped me a lot to sort of frame my exploration. So really recommend that. If you want to get real geeky on translations, which we are going to be talking about in a little bit, there is a book all about translations that just came out. I read it, but honestly, all my research, it wasn't new information for me. But if you are not going to watch 8,000 different videos on Bible translations, you might actually really appreciate this. It is a book by an author, Tim Wildsmith. Where is it? And it's called literally Bible Translations for Everyone, a guide to finding a Bible that's right for you. It's a little bit nerdy, and I find the writing style less approachable. I actually watch reviews by him sometimes about different Bibles. That part's helpful. But I don't know. His writing wasn't crazy engaging, but it was interesting, and it does sort of capture a lot of the information about Bible translations. And I don't know that there's actually a lot of really good books on this subject. So if you want a book to sort of understand how all the different translations were formed, and also kind of see examples of how different passages are written in different translations, this would be useful. However, I will say, if that's what you're interested in, you can literally go to, I think it's called BibleGateway.com, and you can literally pull up a passage and compare it with the same passage in another translation. This was helpful to me in the beginning because I was looking for certain things that I was starting to learn based on translation can make a big difference in how the text is read. And I wanted a translation that felt accurate and current with scholarship, but also that didn't go out of its way to be too dogmatic or too, I guess, biased around a particular faith path. Because there are definitely translations that are really heavily focusing on evangelicals or on more conservative worldviews, and those kinds of things can definitely affect how you read and what you get out of it and whether it is super triggering or not. And so I found that sort of thing important to learn about. But so looking at YouVersion was helpful. Really reading about different translations, again, we're going to talk about that. But yeah, so those are some Kindle books that helped as far as framing and getting started. Okay, so some other general books. This one I just picked up and I'm really excited to read it. This is this sounds very similar actually to Marcus J. Borg's book as far as this one literally says Better Ways to Read the Bible, Transforming a Weapon of Harm into a Tool of Healing. This is by Zach Lambert, and this just came out, I feel 2025. But the contents, again, we all have lenses, so some lenses are better than others. This is going to address that issue of what lens you bring to your study and to your reading, whether you're reading it wrong. Talks about the literalism lens, the apocalypse lens, the moralism lens, the hierarchy lens. I actually took a little bit of a free workshop that went through these different lenses and how they affect how you read. And then also lenses that promote healing. The Jesus lens, the context lens, the flourishing lens, the fruitfulness lens. This feels like it goes even further in progressiveness than Marcus J. Borg's content. This is, again, Marcus J. Borg was an older guy. That's not a problem. I love his writing. But Zach is a younger guy, and I feel brings a fresher take to the subject. So yeah, a must read for anyone wrestling with faith after experiencing harmful Bible interpretations. So again, this looks really, really good. The table of contents looks incredible. I flipped around in here a little bit. Looks like it'll be a pretty quick read and addresses some real problematic things that come up for people in ways that are very loving, and I love that. Okay, so this is really, really good. These are definitely all things that I think look like they'd be really helpful if you're dipping your toes in and you're like, I don't know, man. These look like they'd be, these ones I've read, not this one yet. I'm going to be reading this one soon. But this I've read, the Peter Enns book I've read, John Shelby Spong I've read, and watched talks by. This I haven't read. I'm so excited to read this, actually, but I'm in the middle of a different study. I'll get there in a second. But anyways, these are kind of like good introductory overview type resources. Okay, as far as books go, y'all, I have such a stack. Okay, these next couple are more general, I think, things that are just meant to kind of guide and help. I have not read this. This sounds like it's going to be a little bit dark. Also, the cover makes me feel like it's going to be a little bit dark. This is called Out of the Embers, Faith After the Great Deconstruction. And I have flipped around in here and it reads kind of intense and heavy. I don't know how I feel about it yet, but it is on my list to read. It does feel like a lot. But again, deconstruction can be a big journey. And if you don't know what I mean by that, this is my analogy for sort of deconstruction, reconstruction. The house of, say, Christianity that I was introduced to was full of everybody else's furniture. Like, it was furniture I inherited, right? So my exploration of these topics was always through other people's opinions and dogmas and perspectives. And so for me, deconstruction is like I empty the house of everything. I gut it. I take everything out. And maybe a few of those pieces of furniture I take back in because I like those. They work for me. They fit my aesthetic. Okay. And then I go and I get my own furniture and I put it in the house. So to me, that's kind of what deconstruction and reconstruction is. It's like I'm pulling out all the pieces that have harmed me in the past, that have harmed other people, that I'm not down with. And I do that I'm doing that in a very studied way, in a very scholarly way, I guess you could say, and exploring what feels true, what seems true based on my reading of the text, all that kind of stuff. And I'm getting rid of everything that feels wrong, that doesn't fit, that doesn't feel like it reflects God's character, reflects my relationship with the divine, all that goes. And then I start figuring out, what does it say? What do I believe? And that all gets put back in, if that makes sense. And so there's pieces from my existing spiritual practice that get put back in. But anyway, deconstruction is sort of the gutting of the house. And this feels like it's more focused on the deconstruction process. And sometimes books on deconstruction, I've noticed, have felt like a miss because they're more about people who have been actively in religious circles and are trying to like deprogram themselves. I'm way out. I was out for 20 plus years and I'm like finding my way into something from scratch in a lot of ways. Like I'm having to deconstruct stuff from like my childhood and my teenage years and my young adult years, but I'm coming at things with a big gap of autonomy in between. So sometimes this deconstruction stuff I don't know if this one's for me. That's what I'll say, but I do have it in case you're curious and want to read more about it. This one is looking so promising. I showed this before. I have not read it yet, but it gets into, let's look at topics here. This is called Living the Questions, the Wisdom of Progressive Christianity. Now this has topics such as taking the Bible seriously, thinking theologically, stories of creation, lives of Jesus, talks about restoring relationships, evil, suffering, and a God of love. So it's going to address some hard stuff. Myth of redemptive violence, practicing resurrection, debunking the rapture, love that. Social justice, incarnation, prayer, compassion. I mean, like, there's some really good topics in here. And the contributors to this, there's a thing by Walter Brueggemann here, who is a theologian that I trust. I feel like there's several contributors to this, but it says David Felton and Jeff Proctor Murphy, so it might just be these two guys. But I feel like when I read about this, there was some other, there's an endorsement by John Shelby Spong, so that won me over. And Walter Brueggemann, who has a book called The Prophetic Imagination, which is actually in my stack here. We'll talk about that. But this is, again, another book more about the progressive view. So if you're looking at like coming at things from a much more progressive worldview, I think this is a great one to look at. Okay. This next stack is, I guess you could say, okay, I've got, this one doesn't even belong in a stack. Okay, so this is sort of more cultural context, history, archaeology, that kind of thing. I found this in a used bookstore and I cannot wait to get into it. And it's one of those special finds where it had a really cool news article clipping in it. I cannot wait. I showed this before. Like I said, I haven't read this, but this is right up my alley. This talks about archaeological finds and how they affect our understanding of the biblical narrative. There's a lot of really cool stuff in here about archaeology. I love this stuff. You'll see when you see one of my favorite study Bibles. Love this. But again, I haven't read it. This was a used bookstore find. I'll keep you posted when I do read it. This one I did read and highlighted the heck out of, and it absolutely transformed me. I love it so, 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 so much. And this is The Universal Christ by Richard Rohr. If you are looking for a book that looks at specifically the concept of Christ and the Jesus story, and like oh gosh, how do I even define this? What does it say on the back? Challenges us to search beneath the surface of our faith and see what is sacred in everyone and everything. Anyone who strives to put their faith into action will find encouragement and inspiration. There's so much more here. I feel like there's a lot here about, yeah, original goodness, not original sin. A lot of things very healing in here. If you come from a lot of dogmatic interpretations of the Bible, I feel like you'll really appreciate Richard Rohr's take. Talks about the feminine incarnation. There's a really interesting dialogue with the crucified God here. This is so good. I will reread this over and over again. It was really beautiful, and I feel like it also gave like a nice broad overview. I talked about this in my first video. I gave more coherent thoughts on it because I had finished reading it more recently then. So if you want to hear me talk more about this, make sure you watch my first video in this Charting My Spiritual Path series. I picked this up because I read the Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels. And this was a recent release, so I haven't treated myself to this yet. I have not read this yet. This is in my TBR still. This came out last year, 2025. But it's a book, Miracles and Wonder, the Historical Mystery of Jesus. Elaine Pagels, again, author of the Gnostic Gospels, has a very interesting view, a more Gnostic view, and is a scholar. So she shares a lot of really interesting, I think she's a scholar. Yeah. Is the Harrington Spear Payne Foundation Professor of Religion at Princeton. So she's the author of the Gnostic Gospels. That book is still a bestseller in the area of Gnosticism. So if you're curious about the Gnostic texts, but when I saw she had a book coming out about Jesus, I was like, I'm going to pick this up because the Gnostic Gospels was a great read. Also, the Gnostic Gospels it's just interesting. Her writing style is a little academic, so it might be kind of a lot. And I do have more books that are also very academic in this pile, but so I wouldn't say this is the most accessible. Probably not. I shouldn't say that because I haven't read this one. But her first one, the Gnostic Gospels, or the last one that I read rather, it reads a little academic at times. So we'll see. But I had to pick this up because I am so curious about her take on the historical Jesus. So that's very interesting to me. Okay. I did read this. So this is Walter Brueggemann's The Prophetic Imagination. This was recommended by somebody who I like listening to on topics related to the Bible. And specifically, he was talking about how this is one of his favorite theologians. Walter Brueggemann spoke extensively about the prophets of the Bible, which can be very difficult to read at times. They're quite intense. The prophets were crazy, but they were crazy in a good way. They were very much social justice advocates of their time, and they were really challenging people in power and trying to look out for like the everyday people or the subjugated people, and really calling out and challenging and pushing back against the power systems of their time. And there's really great things to read into that section. And this, again, reads quite academic, but it is very interesting. And he does speak a lot about the impact of all of that. He also has he speaks a lot about Jesus of Nazareth in here. He talks about ministry. He talks about, but the idea of the prophets and their impact, really super interesting. Yeah, prophetic criticizing and the embrace of pathos. It was an interesting read for sure. So, and he's a classic theologian. I feel like he's no longer with us. I could be wrong, but this book, 40th anniversary, means the original copyright is like probably in the 80s. This says 2000. Well, no, that can't be right. I don't know when it was originally written, but this says it's the 40th anniversary, so we can math. Okay, also in the area of scholarship and theology and areas of interest, so the prophets, that was my sort of study into the prophets. I have not fully read this, but I have thumbed through this. I have dipped in and out of this, but I did a whole sort of side study and side quest into atonement theory, which, oh my gosh. Okay, so atonement theory is such a rabbit hole, and it will blow your mind. If you have always been taught that like Jesus died so that to appease a vengeful, like angry God who wanted us all dead, and Jesus was there to like take that punishment for us or whatever, like that was one of the things I specifically went into this to start to unpack. And so things like universal salvation, the concept of universal salvation, the concepts of atonement theory were really important in my personal study. In fact, well, I could do a whole video just talking about that, and I won't because that's a very special interest. But I will say, if this is an area of interest, if this is an area of pain for you in the past, and this is something you want to deconstruct, there are some really incredible things out there around René Girard and the scapegoat theory, and basically essentially the idea that the cross was a symbol of like meant to sort of have humans confront their own evil, basically. And there's a lot more to be said about that. But this is Saved from Sacrifice, A Theology of the Cross by S. Mark Heim. And here's what this says. Mark Heim has written a not-to-be-missed work on the unmasking of sacrificial violence by the biblical witness. He offers stunning interpretation of Old and New Testament texts as he marshals his argument that the event of the cross, narrated in the Gospels, is universally significant, not because it repeats the deadly cycle of sacrifice present in all societies and in all religious ritual and myth, but because it reverses this cycle and rescues us from the practice of scapegoating sacrifice and the violence it both hides and perpetuates. This is a theology of the cross in a bold new key. So this is a book specifically about scapegoat theory. It's going to get into a lot of that kind of stuff. I was fascinated when I discovered this theory of atonement, and it's not, there's like 12 different types of atonement theories that are bandied about in different religious communities. And I find it so interesting that there's like one primary narrative that gets kind of sold to a lot of us. And that's not necessarily the full picture, nor does it necessarily even fully make sense when you start to unpack everything. But anyways, that's me speaking my own opinions. I have not read cover to cover either of these books yet, but I've done extensive studies on both of these subjects. So these are just more of diving deeper into that. And then, of course, I think an area that is my own particular special interest and something that will continue to be a huge focus in my own exploration, and I'm actually in the middle of a study kind of semi-related to this topic right now, actually, is the role of the divine feminine in godhood or in the divine, whether that is via other divine feminine figures that appear through the Bible, whether that's Asherah, who shows up in the old, like as a consort of Yahweh or the original God in the Old Testament. I say original, that's not right, but I'm just babbling. Anyways, this book is incredible, and it's a very quick and easy read and quite thorough for how thin it is. It's actually quite surprising. So this is called The Hidden Goddess, The Quest for the Divine Feminine in the Judeo-Christian Tradition, from Asherah to Mary Magdalene. This is a beautiful read. Loved this. We'll definitely read again. The Divine Feminine in Biblical Wisdom Literature. Okay, this is partly a special interest because pretty much a lot of Proverbs feels like it's literally coming directly from the Divine Feminine, which is a whole rabbit hole in and of itself when you start to think about Proverbs being a source of wisdom, when you start to learn more about the concept of Sophia, which is a feminine, I guess, anthropomorphized concept of wisdom. There is some really cool stuff you can deep dive into on that topic. And the apocryphal books, I realize some of this isn't going to make sense, and thank you for listening to me babble. But the apocryphal books do have some books that really illuminate this even further. Anyway, I thought this was going to get into that more with the Divine Feminine and Biblical Wisdom Literature. It kind of does, but it's mostly like little excerpts from the Biblical Wisdom Literature. Like here, we have Wisdom of Solomon. This is actually an apocryphal book, I believe. I have to go open my study Bible to know. But anyway, so you get this bit, and there's a lot of how did you not see the divine feminine in the Bible going on? But a lot of that is because not all of the books are common canon. So that's a part of it too. But anyways, these are just like little excerpts with little annotations about it, which is pretty cool and fun to dip into. But I haven't like dived into in any detail in this book yet. This was my, I guess, gateway to this entire thing, which started years and years ago. This was one of the things that kind of planted a seed for me going down this path a long time ago, and that is Mary Magdalene Revealed by Megan Watterson. This speaks about Mary Magdalene's gospel and the bits that have been recovered from the scrolls that were found in the caves and some theories about that. This is a beautiful read if you want to learn more about Mary Magdalene and her gospel, which really illuminates the sort of divine love, sacred love nature of the Jesus story, which is just, oh, so beautiful. Anyways, this is a really, really wonderful read and surprising. I think it would surprise most people. And this is a really nerdy thing that I've only begun, and I plan when I fully finish the Bible, I'm going to go back through this and mark and annotate in my journaling Bible. I've done some of that, but I have not gotten very far because it's very, very dense. But this is a book called The Great Lady, Restoring Her Story by Margaret Barker. This was a difficult book to find. I can't remember where I got it. I think it was not easy. Anyways, Margaret Barker, the originator of Temple Theology, is a former president of the Society for Old Testament Study and a prolific author specializing in reconstructing the background of New Testament thought in the Hebrew Bible and early Judaism. This is a lot, but she points out potential translation issues or scribal translation, like when they were literally transcribing by hand sections of the Bible, and where a simple change of a word here or there can dramatically change the meaning of a phrase. And she highlights where in some places it's very likely that the divine feminine was sort of covered up. And I'm still like just barely dipping into this, but it is very, very interesting. And this is like my primary study material for when I get into doing that in a more full and complete way. But I've been doing it as I go through in smaller ways. So this is just going to be such a like dessert for me in going even deeper when I get to that stage. So these are the ones more related to divine feminine, but the one that I'm reading now, and is absolutely blowing my mind. Like I'm literally engrossed in this as we speak, actually. So this is called Women and the Gender of God by Amy Peeler. Okay, sorry, I giggled because this is like so cool. Okay, so the premise of this entire book is that God is not male. And this is coming from somebody who is an Orthodox Christian, who is like, I've already been marking and annotating and like, it's so good. There's a lot of really, really interesting things here because one of the things that really stood out to me, because I went to my Bible read specifically looking for the divine feminine, is that, and something I've discovered too as I've explored more and more theology and listened to more and more scholars, is that there's a very clear switching, which is part of why I'm interested in The Great Lady book, but there's a very clear switching of language where sometimes God is speaking in ways that are very like, I guess the ways we would assume are traditionally masculine or more fatherly. And then sometimes it's speaking in a more motherly, more nurturing kind of way. Sometimes it's offering blessings of strength and is this like war god. And then sometimes it's showing up as and being talked about like giving blessings of fertility. And I'm like, okay, wait, something's not tracking here. Anyways, what's really interesting about this is it's a pretty recent release, I believe, 2022. So it's a pretty recent release, but her entire premise is that God is non-gendered, right? That there is, instead of it being like masculine and feminine or masculine or feminine, is very much neither, and is basically, this is sort of like a thesis for that. It does read like somebody who was working on this as a thesis, so it can be a little bit challenging in places, but slowing down, and there's just tons of footnotes like on every page, so it's kind of a lot, but it's really, really incredible so far. So I've got my like highlighter stuffed in here and my pen stuffed in here because I've been just like, I'm abusing it. That's where we're at. Really excited about this. Loving this so far. And then this is another one. I mean, it's like Women's History Month. Anyways, these books got recommended to me in my feed. Now here's the thing. If I'm going to read a book that is going to highlight female biblical characters, the first thing I want to know is, how are you handling Bathsheba? If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's a story about David who is hailed as like, oh, David brought down the giant, right? David and Goliath situation. Okay. David, rise to kingdom, had a very specific fall where he did some really, really bad things. And there was a connection between him and a woman, Bathsheba, and a lot of circles tell that story in a way that is, I think, harmful and super problematic. Anyways, a careful reading of the text to me makes it very clear that David took advantage of, and well, I don't want to have to put a bazillion trigger warnings in, but Bathsheba was a victim to David. And I think that's very clear when you read the text carefully. And this book, Redeeming Eden, has these short stories, narrative style write-ups about different female characters, specifically in the Old Testament, and has a chapter on Bathsheba. Now, whenever I hear about a book like this, about how that kind of highlights women in the Bible, I'm like, okay, but how do you handle Bathsheba? Because if you don't handle Bathsheba correctly, I can't trust you. So that's just my take. And oh my God, all I've read in this so far is the chapter on Bathsheba, but it was so freaking good. Hold on. It is called Recovering Bathsheba's Dignity. So it's chapter 11 in this book, and it does an absolute incredible job at explaining and backing up with word studies and exactly what happens and what Bathsheba's story is all about and how it concludes in a way that is absolutely brilliantly done, which means I am pretty sure I can trust this author for fair treatment of the other women in these stories. There are just several women that show up in the Bible that get bad reads from, let's put it this way. Mary Magdalene was called a prostitute for years and years and years, and the church has finally admitted there's actually no biblical basis for her to be called a prostitute. But like, that should have never happened. So a lot of women in the Bible have been maligned in various ways over the years. And so like looking at them through a more fair lens has been really empowering to me as part of my study. And I've heard really good things about this book, so I picked it up once I heard that she treated Bathsheba well, and then I read the Bathsheba chapter, and I'm like, sold. So I read that just like today. Not the whole book, but just that chapter. So good. And then I got into this, and now I can't put this one down. So this is where I'm at the moment. Okay, so do I have to put this into 2 parts? No, it's fine, because not very many people are gonna watch this in the first place, I don't think. So, and if a lot of you watch it, cool. Awesome. Thanks for hanging out with me and listening to me geek out about all these things. Okay, so I think as far as books that are not Bibles and Bible translations, I've got one small other stack, and that is a mini special interest for me. These are the Chosen Bible study guides. This is not something I would recommend to somebody new to doing any deconstruction, reconstructing work, but I have been loving them. I love the series, The Chosen. I really, really genuinely have enjoyed it. I think it's really beautifully done. I have not encountered too many things that I take issue with. In fact, for the most part, I feel like it jives with the way that I have been exploring and has not like put my teeth on edge. There's been a couple spots where I'm like, okay, maybe not. But for the most part, I've really enjoyed it. So I picked up their Bible studies. I've already done all of season 1. I'm partway into season 2, but I also have season 3, 4, and 5 to go through. These are just like a little treat, a little fun treat. And this is my journal and pen that I use specifically with this study. But that's the only other thing I think I have as far as like books before we get into Bibles, I think. Okay, wait, no, that's not true. I got one more category, devotionals. So I find devotionals very challenging because they often get real. Whenever there's other people's interpretations and other people's opinions, they can get a little bit questionable. I got this one called Jesus Calling by Sarah Young. This is not, okay, here's the thing. I enjoyed it for a little while. I don't think I want to let it go yet. But it's written as though like Jesus is talking to you, and it's just kind of a little much sometimes, but the messages are really sweet, but also it's like it's not really Jesus, so like it feels weird. I don't know that I like that style just because it feels, I don't know, a little bit campy and like sales, like I don't know, it just hits funny. But this particular one is really popular. There's different versions of it, but some parts of it felt comforting, and I could see it being really nice. It's one of those ones that's dated. I could see it being really nice in like almost like a bibliomantic way, like where you like thumb through and just go, okay, what's the message? And then read that. I think that could be nice, but I just have shelved this for a while. I'm not quite ready to like rehome it, but I've shelved it. And there have been a couple of books I've read and rehomed already. I just realized that I can't really talk about that I may have mentioned in the previous video, but this one I have really genuinely enjoyed. It's called Live in Grace, Walk in Love by Bob Goff. It's very non-dogmatic. There's like a Bible verse, and then there's like a little personal story. I don't read this every day or anything like that, but I have dipped in and out of this, and I've so far not found anything that's like pissed me off, which, let's be honest, that's not really always easy for people to do, because a lot of things piss me off because they're just too pushy or dogmatic or like bad reads. I don't like bad reads on the text. That just gets under my skin. Okay. We're going to talk about translations, the Bibles that I have and use and how I use them. So let me talk about where I started. And that is with the NRSV updated edition. So NRSV updated edition. This is actually the first one that I bought. And this is, I think it's the personal size. The NRSV, how do I begin? Okay, so the NRSV stands for New Revised Standard Version. And it is considered, the New Revised Standard Version is the version used for like the Oxford Annotated Bible, the Oxford Annotated Study Bible, which is what's used in like scholarly applications. The New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition is the most recent, as far as I know, scholarship-wise, it's got the most recent scholarship. And this one came out, was it 2022? Copyright 2022. Before this, the most recent translation that I know of any Bible translation was 2020. Now, something to know about Bible translations, they are generally an entire team of people, and who is on that team can obviously have a big influence on what sort of translation decisions are made. But something else to know about translations, and I'm going to try to cover this very briefly, there is a spectrum of translations. Okay, so like, here's our spectrum of, this is a lighter, here's our spectrum of translations. At this side, you have word for word translations, where the translation team tries to translate the original languages, which is generally going to be Aramaic and Hebrew in the Old Testament, and Koine Greek in the New Testament. So in the Old Testament, they're trying to translate, okay, this word is this in English, this word is this in English, and construct the text that way. So at the strictest definition, it's word for word translation. On the other side, and that's called functional form, it's something equivalence, formal equivalence, something like that. On the other side, you have dynamic equivalence or thought for thought translation. So over here is word for word, over here is thought for thought. Thought for thought is like, instead of trying to go word, 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 you go, what is the entire sentence in that language and what is it conveying? Now translate this over into a sentence that would convey the same thought, even if the words are different. Now you can see that you're going to have a much different application or translation of the text, of the original source materials that they have access to. You're going to get a much different reading, thought for thought versus word for word. And there's a lot of debate about which is better. And I'll say this after having worked with and read quite a few translations at this point. I will say that there are 1000% benefits to both extremes of this scale. And I actually find a lot in these like kind of gray areas in the middle to be super, super helpful. I will show you the most extreme version of a thought for thought that I have, and I'll show you the most extreme version of a word for word I have. But in my opinion, anything along this spectrum is useful, but what's most useful is reading in more than one translation because it is eye-opening. And you can do that really easily online by just whatever version you choose to pick is your like home version, which I will recommend. Even though there's not a lot to choose from, I will recommend the NRSV UE as a study translation if you really want to like understand it. And also it's a little bit of a higher reading level, but it's not, I don't find it unreadable at all, but its scholarship is the most current. So I feel like if you want something that is like where they're taking into account Dead Sea Scrolls and other pieces of text that have been found and making sure that all makes it in, this is really great. Also, this is the only translation I know of that includes 14 apocryphal books. So it doesn't have all of there's different kinds of apocrypha. We'll talk about that in a minute. This includes 14. A Catholic Bible typically has 7 of those books as part of its canon. So the Catholic Bibles often use NRSVs, but it's an NRSV CE, Catholic edition, and it has 7 of the apocryphal books. So I think they're called deuterocanonical books. There's 7, but the NRSV UE has 14 of them. And those books were important to me in my study that they be included. I also side studied some that are not included in most translations, like the Book of Enoch, which is very interesting. But anyway, so you will find in here the books that come in between the traditional Old Testament and the New Testament, including the book, The Wisdom of Solomon, which is absolutely an incredible book and so worth reading. Also, the Book of Sirach, which is also really incredible. But then you've got 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Maccabees, Esdras. There's some other books in here you may have never heard of because they're not usually included in the traditional canon. So anyways, NRSV updated edition is considered, if you were to like look at this spectrum, the NRSV would be kind of around here. So it's closer to word for word, but it's not all the way over at like the extreme end. It also would fall, if you were to say, if this was a grid, there's a YouTube video that describes this, right? Where it's like, I guess, more like religious. How do we say that? All Bibles are religious, I guess. But like the more, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess I would say dogmatic. Okay, so you would have like more like leaning into kind of Christian concepts quadrant of the word for word side. And then you would have the more open, scholarly version down here. This is kind of like closer to word for word and more scholarly than dogmatic, I guess I would say. So it feels like it's in the space that was really accessible for me starting, where it's not going to introduce a lot of like, the translation is going to be focused on being accurate and being as current with text critical scholarship as possible without taking like a theological position. Maybe that's the best way to put it. I realize I'm probably going to make no sense to half of you, and that's okay. I'm doing the best I can here. But one of the things I will suggest is that if you're thinking about one, is to read these introductory pieces where it talks about to the reader from the National Council of Churches, from the Society of Biblical Literature. So this is who is behind the NRSV updated edition. The SBL is, I would say, lots of modern scholars, more likely to be open, and they have people that the Society of Biblical Literature actually has people on the translation team from various faiths. So these could be people that are Jewish, Christian, Catholic, etc., etc. So their translation team is the broadest in terms of like how many different beliefs are represented on that team. So I trust the translation more, if that makes sense, because I feel like it's had more of that influence from all these different schools of thought who are more concerned about the scholarly accuracy of the text than of like an agenda. And I just trust that more. There are some translation teams that are almost entirely from like one theological school of thought. And so even if they intend to be as faithful to the text as possible, and all translations are pretty similar, but some slight tiny changes can actually make a big difference in how the text feels to you, how it reads to you, and whether it feels truly open for reading with different lenses, or if you're being kind of spoon-fed a particular version of the text. Does that make sense? And sometimes that happens in the smallest, simplest little word. It can be the choice of a word like, what's a good example? I'm trying to think. Okay, like in the NRSV, and this actually, NRSV UE, actually, in this specific edition, the most famous, I should say, the most famous passage in the Bible is the very first sentence. It says, in the beginning, except not in this version, which I find fascinating because it means they weren't afraid to check the language and the translation and make it make sense in context the way that it actually is in the original source material. So it's actually when God began to create the heavens and the earth, not in the beginning God began to create. And you would think that's such a tiny thing and would it matter? But I will show you in a little while a study material I have that shows how important these translation decisions are and how much debate and like stuff goes into it. It's pretty incredible when you get into it. Anyway, the New Revised Standard Version, the updated edition, is, I think, one of the most scholarly translations you can get your hands on, and it's certainly the most current. And because I know that the team comes from a variety of beliefs, it just feels very trustworthy to me. So I picked this up, but this has no room for note-taking. I picked this up before I really knew what I was going to be doing, and so this was great, but and I did start to do some reading in here, but I wanted something where I could note-take. So I put this on my shelf. This is now just I guess if I ever want one to take anywhere, I don't know. I'm keeping it, but then I picked this up, which is the exact same text block, except this is the journal edition. So in here, you have these wide margins with lines. Great. I think the text size is also bigger. Maybe not. They might be the same. It might be the same. So I think this is like a 9. I don't know how to find out. But anyways, this is my study Bible. And so this is the one where I've been doing all of my note taking. Somebody asked me to show how I add pages to my Bible. So I will briefly talk about that. So I said that I tip it in. So here's what I mean by that. Let me grab a piece of paper. I'll show you. Okay, I'm going to show you this with a standard piece of printer paper because what I use in this Bible is actually Tomoe River paper that I get in like an A5 sheet. And I cut it in half and I round the corners using a corner rounder, like what I would use to modify a card deck, right? So I round the corners. And then what I do, I learned this, there's the most popular technique actually for adding pages into your Bible is actually just to apply glue to the raw edge. So using glue stick, right? Apply glue to the raw edge, shove it in there, and then close your Bible. And usually, apparently that sticks. I didn't trust that method and I saw a different method that I liked better. And so this is the method I use. So I would have cut this piece so it's shorter and so it fits in. And then you take just a really small amount. I guess it's probably about 1/4 inch like this. Okay. So I fold over a little lip like that of about 1/4 inch. And I slide another piece of paper under here so that I don't mess up my main page. And I put glue stick along this and I slide that in and then I close it. And so to show you what that looks like, hopefully you can see it. This is a page I pasted in about ziggurats. So you can see hopefully where the thing about the Tomoe River paper, cream paper, is it's almost the exact same color as my Bible paper in this particular Bible, so that's awesome. But anyways, you can hopefully see that little lip there. That's where I glued it. And because it's already folded, it's in there real good. And so here's my little sheet that I added. And I've been actually taking articles out of a study Bible and putting them in here sometimes. So I did that a lot in the Old Testament, and this was like all about ziggurats, which is very cool, actually. So yeah, I've got articles in here on the flood. I've got all kinds of notes. I highlight the crap out of this. I am using mild liners, and my favorite Bible writing pen is a Jetstream Uno. Let's see if it'll tell us what it is. It's like this, a jet stream. I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah, 0.7. I think that's what that says. So I have rainbow highlighters, and what I basically do is I highlight a piece of text, I write my note, and I highlight it in the same color. So I know this note is to this piece of text. This note is to these pink parts. This one is to this, right? This one is to this one is to, you get the idea. So I do that all through, and that's what I've been doing the whole time. This note goes to this, so that as I fill it up, I just change colors, and I can follow, and that's especially helpful. Like, I'm in here doing a study in John, and like, it's getting a little crazy up in here. So having lots of different highlighter colors is actually really helpful. But this is sort of my like park, where I park all of my notes and all of my stuff. These tabs on the side are Bible tabs you can buy and stick in your Bible. But obviously it did not have all of the, this first set I got did not have all of the apocryphal book tabs. So I got these are actually removable sticky tabs. But I got those, and I put them in for all of the apocryphal books. So Sirach, which is also Ben Sirah, Wisdom of Ben Sirah, Baruch, Letter of Jeremiah, because this does have extra books. You won't find Bible tabs that have all of these, because the NRSV UE is the only one that has, or the NRSV is the only one that has all 14. Again, the Catholic editions have 7, so if you can get Bible tabs that have the Catholic books, then you'll get half of them, and then you just have to make up the other half. But yeah, so I wanted this because it has the deuterocanonical or apocryphal books of the Old Testament included. Again, that's not something you'll find in most translations. So the NRSV UE is my only one that has all the apocryphal books in it, which again makes it a good one for my main sort of study and dumping ground. I have read all of these. I have read, I guess, basically through like half of Mark. But as you can see, because of other things I've done, because I'm doing a study in here, or like I did a study in, is it Galatians? No. Ephesians? Yeah, I did a study in Ephesians. It's not a lot, but I've got some notes. I also did a study in Colossians. So even though I haven't read cover to cover all the New Testament yet, I have been in pieces back in here. So there's actually not much left to go as far as my full read. And there's just been a ton of really good stuff. Anyways, okay, so this is my main translation, the NRSV UE. I've got 2 of these. I would say this is like, the difference in profile is quite phenomenal, but like, this is not very portable, but this is the one that I beat up. This is the one that I put all my notes in, and it's great. Not that I'm afraid to put notes in other things. I'm not, but this is my main one. And it's not very pretty, but okay. So now we're going to talk about, so that's my NRSV UE. The other scholarly translation I only have one of. Oh, okay, the other one that is pretty good, I just got one of these, and I got it because it's so cute and little, is the NASB. This one is apparently even more word for word than the NRSV UE. So this is the North American Standard Bible. This is the 2020 text, which raised all kinds of feathers, because one thing that the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition, and actually a lot of Bibles are doing this now, but they've changed the language from where it's masculine and doesn't need to be. So like if the original Hebrew word was a masculine word because that's how the language is, but it was meant to refer to all people, not just men, they've updated the language. So like if the word was originally translated brothers, but that's meant to include men and women, they've updated it to say brothers and sisters, or men and women, or some Bible versions now are saying the word people, because the idea was a lot of the times masculine was just the default pronouns or the default words used, but that's not necessarily, like there are specific words for men or for, yeah, if you're specifically trying to say brother and only mean brothers, there was a word for that. They didn't use that word. They used the word that was more generic and meant to apply to both. So where those situations have occurred, more modern translations are beginning to incorporate more gender neutral language in those places. In other words, to at least, I shouldn't say gender neutral, at least trying to encompass both men and women in that situation. The North American Standard Bible 2020 text also does this. This is also so cute. Look at how cute, look at how little it is. Like, there's my hand. I feel like I need a tarot card comparison. Doesn't that feel like that's what we should do here? So here's like it's little. My one downside about compact Bibles is they often have super tiny text. When you get into Bibles this small, they're usually like a 6.5 or 7 point font, which is very small. This is an 8 point, I believe, or a 7.5. I can still read it. It's a lot, but it is actually my only NASB translation. But I thought it would be great to have a little portable one. for study that is more scholarly. So NASB is quite word for word as I understand it. The translation philosophy of the NRSV UE is basically as literal as, or as something like as strict as necessary, or there's a term for it. It's like it's very, very faithful to the original text, but it is as free as necessary to get the idea across. So this is a little bit more, I don't know, and I like the way this is written. Sometimes the wording is a little bit prettier in this, but the NASB, it's a little bit more literal in places, but it still reads pretty well, I'm finding. I've kind of dipped around in here just to kind of see what it's like, and it's been fine. But it's in like a suede feeling fake leather. These are all fake leather. I don't have any real leather. Actually, technically, I do technically have one, but it's a crappy quality one. But anyways, this is like a suede feeling one. It's my only one like that. And look how little she is. It's so cute. Anyways, I just thought it was really cute. And I wanted one that was a little bit more portable for study purposes and such. But, and I mean, you can read all these different translations online, usually for free. So you don't have to get physical copies of everything, but I'm a nerd and I like physical things. Okay, so that's that translation. One thing you won't find in my collection is a King James Version or a New King James Version, because in my studying about translations, I have really discovered that if the one translation that has kind of refused to update itself, like the NASB, this is the 2020 version. Previous to this, there was a 1995 version. It's continued to keep up with scholarship, just like with the NRSV and the NRSV updated edition. The King James Version, in my rudimentary understanding, there's lots of things that I'm concerned about. Number one, that it was commissioned by a king, and there was a lot of inherent, I've heard some things that imply that there's some inherent protection of people in power in that version, in how it's translated. I could be completely wrong about that. Do your own homework. And then the New King James Version is just like a more modernized language, but the same text, basically. So as far as I know, there have been no updates. There's been no, there's not a 2020 version or a 2015 or even a year 2000 version of the King James and the New King James. And I feel like there's been so much learned about the languages, and better translations have come about because of what's been learned by discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the texts in the Qumran caves that have sometimes corroborated text and sometimes not. But there are passages, here's an example, actually, at the end of, I think it's Mark. Yep, it's the end of Mark. Okay, at the end of Mark, the original text basically ends with Jesus being resurrected and telling Mary, and the other women at the tomb, and then they run away and never tell anyone. That's actually what it says in the original version of Mark at the end. But then later, scribes came in and added some other endings. And so it's actually called out in the NRSV UE. So they literally say, the resurrection of Jesus ends here. And it literally, the last sentence is, they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. But then it says the intermediate ending of Mark, and it's in brackets, double brackets. And in the intermediate ending, there's one thing that happens to conclude this book. And then there's the long ending. And this was also a later edition. It's also in double brackets, because recent scholarship showed and proved that these were later editions. They weren't in the original books. They were added by later scribes. Probably because it didn't look very good that the women ran off and didn't tell anybody. I mean, I don't know, but it is an interesting perspective. And so there's things like that come about because of modern scholarship that I feel like it's missed when we don't get an updated version. The original King James is the thee and the thous. And so some of the phrasing and the wording is really beautiful, but I have no interest in reading something that I think just kind of refuses to update itself with what we understand words to mean, and especially as language expands and things are discovered. There's actually, if you actually look at the verse numbers, there's one or two verses that are in the King James that aren't in modern translations, because they've discovered that they were literally margin notes that got included somehow in the actual text, but they were actually margin notes. They weren't part of the original text. And so there's little things like that have come about, that I've learned about as I've studied this, is why I don't have a King James Version or a New King James Version. But I trust the NRSV UE, the NASB, as I've heard, this one and this one are the two most often to be used in scholarly, academic settings and things like that. So trust both of those. Now for readability, I have quite a few NLTs. This is the New Living Translation. So we're going to talk about those. I've basically, usually in my other translations, I feel like I was trying to get this video organized so that it all made sense, but I realize it's not as organized as I want it to be. So I'm just going to jump into NLT. So the New Living Translation is definitely more on this scale. It's over here where it's definitely thought for thought. It's modern language, so it's really easy to read. It flows really well. You don't have to stumble over words. It's really easy to understand. It's its translation team definitely has more theological or religious skin in the game. So I keep that in mind when I read that translation. It's definitely not my scholarly, but it's very easy to understand, and it just makes it super readable. And so I actually have I have like 6 of those. Let me show you those. So I have 4 study Bibles and 2 reading Bibles in the NLT. Anyways, I have this one. I've shown this in the past. This is a project for me. Actually, I think I'm in here I am. Look, I'm in the 2nd Samuel with this right now. This is a project. So I call this I don't know what I call this. It started out kind of like as a chakra kind of Bible. So this is a themed kind of Bible. This is the New Living Translation, NLT compact giant print. The text is really nice and big, so it's really easy to see. I put these really cute rainbow tabs. I love these rainbow tabs. You will see these again. And I created these categories with these flags. So this hot pink one is anytime I see something in the text that feels like it represents the divine feminine or mother energy or Sophia. More on that. And then I have, okay, let me go through my chakras first. So I have root, which is going to be safety, security, stability, grounding, foundation, acceptance, and protection. I have solar plexus. No, sorry, I have root. I have sacral, sensuality, experience, sex, feeling, and movement. I have solar plexus, empowerment, strength, drive, and determination, and discipline. I have heart, healing, calming, grace, grief, emotions, and love. I have throat, communication, trust, expression, prayer, and faith. I have third eye for magic, intuition, spiritual gifts, and divination. And then I have other categories. So I have earth for nature and earth's majesty. I have father for any divine masculine kind of energy. I have mother for divine feminine energy. What else do I have here? I think that's it. So it's basically divine masculine, divine feminine, all the 7 chakras plus nature, basically. And so what I've been doing is flagging verses with a matching highlighter color. So this is the highlighter color, and then this is the flag. So if I wanted to read all about things that feel like they're grounding, I would go to all these red flags and I'd read the red passages. And this is a lot of work. Actually, I have red here. Oh, it's over here. And so I have different passages. I don't know. This just feels like kind of like a fun project, but I was doing this as I was finishing each book, as I was doing my read through, and then I kind of stalled out. So I just kind of pick it up and work on it sometime. I've been working on this specifically. This is David's Song of Praise, and I've just been flagging like every part of it with a different color because it's really beautiful and it all covers different areas. So that's been kind of fun. But yeah, that's the idea behind this one. Originally I was thinking this was going to be my like compact carry around kind if I wanted one like that, but this is so much smaller. This little, and I gotta get rid of this sleeve. I don't actually need the sleeve anymore. Look at how much smaller it is. It's so much cuter. Anyways, NLT, really easy to read. So that's fun. This is also recent. This is a Jesus Center Bible. I got this because it's a more recent version. There's another one called the Jesus Bible, but that looked a little bit more, less scholarly. I don't know that this is even all that scholarly, but the other one looked worse. But basically what this does is it highlights whenever there's something happening in the Old Testament that potentially turns up in the New Testament or is later referencing back to Jesus, like, or how this is connected to the Jesus part of the narrative, how it connects back to what happens later on in the narrative. So this kind of has all this blue text, and wherever there's blue text, there'll be like a little call out box, and it's like pointing you in the direction of like how that connects back to Jesus. So I thought this would be kind of fun when I'm ready to do another reread, but to specifically look for that meta narrative and like see how it's showing, because there's definitely, like I said, a meta narrative that's taking us forward into the New Testament. And then, so that just was kind of a fun little thing. Plus it's pink. But this is in that New Living Translation. More serious study is what we're getting into now. So we have this one, which I absolutely love. This is called the Every Woman's Bible. So it's a woman's study Bible. So it covers a lot of topics. It highlights the women characters in the Bible really well. It's very well done. There's a lot of really good study notes and study material in it. Charts and maps and highlights and things that it calls out, but also these really great little articles that I feel like just feel really nice. Definitely handles topics where horrible things happen to women and like doesn't shy away from them and addresses them, which is really great. I really enjoy this. This is a filament enabled Bible, which basically means you can get an app and you can scan, like once it's set up, mine is set up, you can scan any of these page numbers and it'll pull up all these extra study materials. So you've got like just a ton. The study notes are here, but they're not so many that it's quite overwhelming. You'll see when I show you some of my others, but the study notes are down here at the bottom. Some of my study Bibles, the study notes are a lot. but this one is really great. I have done some highlighting in there here, but very little comparatively. I've done some reading. There's some great pictures if you're somebody that like really likes to see graphs. But also what's great about this is that this one, the articles and the call outs are mostly written by a female team, like women scholars and women contributors. Sometimes the women's study Bibles, like all the contributors are men. And I'm like, that's great. But like, okay, there's lots of women scholars too. So I like that about this one. I've seen some other popular ones get called out because the team that puts the notes in are like all guys. And I'm like, yeah, that's fair. It's fair criticism. Okay, this one is really good, but it's a lot with study notes. So this is here's my rainbow tabs again. You can tell I like these because they're very flexible and they're light and they don't like tear the page at all. Anyway, this is the NLT Illustrated Study Bible. Tons of study notes, but also tons and tons of like maps and pictures and references. Oh, you can tell I never opened that page before. Animals in Israel. That's kind of cool. There's a lot of stuff in here. The New Covenant, lots of charts. There's also character call-outs, but like these are the study notes. Like it's actually very beefy, this one, behind the text. Book introductions are actually really helpful. So they'll tell you things like where this book was set, what kind of text it is. Is this like wisdom literature? Is this history? Is this prophet? What's the story? What's the timeline? What's going on here? Who wrote it? Because oftentimes the author attributed is not who wrote it. We don't have any evidence of a historical Moses, for example. So the books of Moses are not necessarily actually written by a guy named Moses, right? Like, so there's history. There's things to keep in mind. Anyways, but yeah, there's a lot of study notes. So this is my beefiest one as far as like well, actually it's not, but this is it's pretty extensive. We'll put it that way. I'm pretty sure this might be my thickest study Bible. Actually, there's a lot in here. And of course, because it's illustrated, but here's the thing about this. This is the New Living Translation. A lot of these study notes, these graphics, these images are available in the Filament app, which is this book also Filament enabled? I don't know if it is. It might not be. This might be where all the Filament notes came from. Oh, look, see, in the beginning, I was doing a lot of stuff in here. In the very beginning. And then I was like, this is too much. It was too many study notes. And if you read the passage and then you read all of the study notes, you can actually, it takes you like 3 times the amount of time to read the text. And I was reading everything. And this is good, but yeah. So this will be fun for another revisit, but it's really great to have one with all of this content. But all this content is now also, I think, in the app. So I don't know that I strictly need this anymore, but it's cool. This one, I would say stay away from if you're new to this journey, because this is a life application. I got it because it was chronological, which is exciting because my read-through was mostly chronological, which means that instead of having the text in the usual book order, it actually has it in timeline order, which is awesome. But there's a ton of notes. There's a lot of side questing that happens. But here's the thing, because it's life application, all that life application stuff is obviously can be very dogmatic because it's telling you how to apply the text to your life. And like, I see how that's helpful for people with certain goals in reading the text, but because I'm trying to stay away from dogma, that sometimes felt not great to me. So this one is tabled. I haven't ditched it. I've gotten something a little bit better for this sort of thing that I'm going to share next, but this was a little bit disappointing because I'm like, I want study notes. I don't necessarily want application notes because I feel like that's something I could figure out like on my own. So that's been a thing, but that's also New Living Translation because again, it's very readable. My most recent New Living Translation, though, is this one, which, as you can see, is much thinner. This is a chronological one without all the extra stuff, but this is a timeline. It's called, what's it called? The Timeline Bible. Okay, here's what's cool about this, though. This is so cool. First of all, when you get into most of your reading, it's single column format, which is amazing. I find that easier to read. It's more like reading a book. When there is the same information being shared across multiple books, it puts them directly side by side. So for example, when you're reading 2 Kings as a book, you'll find if you ever do a full read through, 1st and 2nd Kings is literally repeated in 1st and 2nd Chronicles, but different things are emphasized at different points, and there's a slightly different perspective from each of those books. So here it puts it side by side. So here when 2nd Kings and 2nd Chronicles are talking about the same thing, the text is directly beside it. So you can actually compare and contrast as you read, which is so freaking cool. And this is especially cool in the New Testament because you have Matthew, Mark, and Luke literally side by side, all telling the same story. So you can immediately see how they tell it differently and where the differences are and how they're different perspectives and what they're trying to share about the story of, say, Jesus's ministry, why they maybe highlighted different things. Really excited about this, actually, because I am already finding it very interesting how different, like here we've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all talking about John the Baptist preparing the way for the Lord. Very, very cool stuff. Anyways, and some stories are only told in one of the Gospels. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. Why did only John tell that story? Nobody else told that story. I just find it really interesting. Anyway, so this is really cool. And I think this is for me because it's not really, there's not really any study notes. There's just this literal timeline that runs along the bottom. So the whole thing's in chronological order. So Psalms show up when they're related to what's happening, right? Everything is like in that chronological, so you know about where you are at, like historically. So this is during the time of Solomon. So I know that when I'm reading these Psalms, these are happening during Solomon's reign, things like that. Or like here, it's telling me, okay, I'm between, it's between Jehoshaphat and Hezekiah. So it's the overlap between those two that I'm reading this section. And it's all on this timeline on the bottom. So very, very cool. And none of those application study notes. So like if you were looking for something chronological, I would go this for sure over this. This is definitely got a lot more content, but it's more application stuff. And I feel like I have this covered in the illustrated study Bible. I don't need all the life application stuff for sure. Okay. So those are all my New Living translations. Oh my God, so much. Okay. We're almost done translations. I have one. Where is my... Oh, I guess we'll get there. Okay. I have one Christian Standard Bible. This is a CSB translation. I just got it because it was pretty. Okay. The CSB, when I was talking about this translation spectrum, the CSB is kind of dead center on the map that I show. So it's right in between, word for word, thought for thought, like dead in the middle. It tries to be dead in the middle. That's its whole agenda. But it's also dead in the middle between scholarly and like sort of religious, I guess you could say. But I got this one. I don't love the CSB. Like I think it's fine, but I got this one because it is chock full of the Gustave Doré illustrations in context. So it'll actually highlight the text in this gold color. See if I can find one and show you. Okay, so here, this is talking about the Queen of Sheba. There's this passage here, 1 Kings 10, 1 through 2 is actually what's being illustrated here. So the text is actually gold. So when you hit this gold text, you know to look for the image. And there's like a ton of these images throughout. And I just thought that was really cool. So it's really pretty. Also, the text is in single column. So it's just enjoyable to read in this. And it's like having a illustrated version. It's basically what it is. It's called the Adorned. And a lot of these, by the way, I got on like crazy discount because I was able to get some copies on Book Outlet where they were like really inexpensive. Or there's christianbooks.com, I think it is. They sometimes have insanely inexpensive versions of some of these. So yeah, this is what I would call a reading Bible. So one that I'm just getting out because it's pretty and I'm just reading. But my favorite reading one is a different translation. And this is the most, I think, if you would just want to read and you don't want to get caught up in all the stuff I've been showing you, this is an NIV, so it's a New International Version, which is, I would say, probably one of the ones used most commonly everywhere, it feels like. It feels like this is the most, like the NIV is the one that everybody seems to use, but I find that it's neutral. I'm neutral about it. It doesn't feel... It's more readable. I would say it's easier to read than like the NRSV or some of the more word for word types, but it's not as easy as like the NLT. It's kind of like in the middle of those two, but this is really special. So this is called the Lectio. And what this is it feels like a hardbound book. Like it's pretty basic, but it is laid out single column. There are no verse numbers in here. There's only verse numbers, like, you know, when you look in like a dictionary or in like an encyclopedia and it has the little references at the bottom. So this tells me I'm in 2 Kings and this page goes from 323 to 413. And on this page, it goes from 414 to 434, but there's no actual verse numbers. So it's literally like you're just reading a book. You're just reading a book. And so I find this is actually a really nice way to read if you're reading a big chunk, because you can just read it through and you're without all the different, like most of these have like, I'll just show you, like in my NRSV. So most of the time when you're reading, there's all these like little headings. Okay, that's the Psalms. That's a terrible example. There's all these like little headings for each chapter, like little titles, which are helpful. But if you're just reading, it's like it feels like you're reading lots and lots of small essays almost in a weird way because of the way it breaks up the text. When you're reading in something like this, you're just reading it. You're just reading it. So that's how that is set up. And it's very, very enjoyable to read in this. So this is a really nice, cozy read. That's my only NIV. Okay. Another just for reading I have, and I've got two in this translation. This is the New English translation. This is called The Abide. This is more like a devotional kind because as you're reading, it's also single column, but then it has these sections where it gives you like journal prompts or like areas to contemplate or to maybe pray about, which is really lovely and feels very like, this feels more like a spiritual read of the text as opposed to a scholarly read. And sometimes I need to get out of my own way if I'm reading. If I want to get into more of the spiritual side of it, then this is nice. So I've been really enjoying this. I've been reading this alongside more scholarly, like in my New Testament study right now, my John study, I'm reading in this. I'm reading in my study, my NRSV, and then I'm also reading in some other stuff. But the New English translation, what's special about that, oh my gosh, you guys, is this. So this is the New English translation full notes edition. I referenced this earlier. The New English translation, you can access this online, but the premise of this is that the translation team, they talk about that. They talk about who the NET Bible team is. They talk about the reader. They talk about their goals for this translation. They wanted to also to create a really accurate, faithful translation. But what's really cool is they tell you how all the translation decisions were made. This is very, very cool. So for example, this is literally just the first 2 verses of Genesis, and these are all notes about how that translation decision was made. I mentioned that earlier when it was like when God began to create versus in the beginning. This is how the whole thing is. Look at all these notes. This is the text. So this is just a reference. This is just for study. I don't sit and read in this, but if I want to reference something, I can go here and then see if there's any specific notes that like will break it down to do word studies or figure out, okay, what do they mean in the Hebrew? What do they mean in the Greek or whatever? So this is a very cool reference. That's all it is. But I like being able to have it available in case I want to reference anything like that. So this is super handy for that. Really cool. But yeah, that is the NET translation, which I find to be a pretty decent one. It's not like my absolute favorite. I'm still going to stick with NRSV, but I'm finding it really easy to read. But this is the one that's actually easy to read, and this is the one that like is just study reference. And then 2 more study references for actual translations. This is another CSB, so Christian Standard Bible. I got this. This is called, I covered this in a previous video, but this is called Connecting Scripture. And what this does is it uses color coding. This is just the New Testament, but it uses color coding with either green text or blue text whenever in the New Testament someone's saying something and it is either a direct quote from the Old Testament or it's referencing something from the Old Testament, which happens a lot more than you would think and gives a lot of interesting context to things that they're saying. Really changes how we interpret things, actually. But anyways, wherever you see some of that text, you'll see all of these study notes. So this is only the New Testament. It's quite a lot of notes, but it's been really helpful in my New Testament read to kind of look for where, because I've read the entire Old Testament, so I know what they're talking about, and then I can cross-reference that. But instead of having to go pull out my Old Testament and look for that reference, it's just, they explain it down below. So like, there's a healing at Capernaum, and there's some blue text. He himself took our weaknesses and carried our diseases. And then the number next to it is 9. So I just go down here and I look for that note and I read about it, and it'll explain what it's referencing there, how that references the Old Testament. There's also obviously a ton of cross references and things. So this is very cool as a study resource. And it's been, like I said, very, very helpful. So right now when I'm doing my deep dive of John, where's my bookmark? There it is. This is where I'm at. I'm in John 6, or actually I just finished John 6 technically. So I'm in John 7 now, but I haven't started John 7. But I'll read through it in my NRSV, then I'll read it in here. I'll read it in my Abide. So I've read it in 3 different translations, the CSB, the NRSV, and the NET. I'll read it in all those. And then I also read it, I've talked about this before, in the First Nations version, which I've talked about on the channel. This is just a beautiful way to read a completely different take on the text. It's really, really cool. It just adds a whole storytelling flavor to, this is upside down. It adds a whole storytelling flavor to the text. It's really nice. I've shared examples. I recently picked up the Psalms and Proverbs. Right now, these are the only two that are out that I know of, is New Testament and Psalms and Proverbs. I don't know if they're planning to do an Old Testament, but these are very cool, and I find reading them really sheds new light on what is being talked about and what is meant. And they seem very faithful as far as how they've translated, so I love that. And I wouldn't call these like scholarly in the sense that like they're not exact replicas of the text, but they're very, 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 very close, but just told in this storytelling style that's really beautiful. Okay. Last study Bible is this one. This is the one that got me started. This is like a bonded leather because it was cheap. I got a discount version of it. This is my other NIV. I knew I had another one. So yeah, so I have my Adorned. No, not my Adorned. I have my Lectio. This one. This one's an NIV, and then this one's an NIV. This, I also have an NRSV version on my iPad, but it's hard to read on my iPad. I find it much easier here. So I have tabs again on this one to make it easy to navigate. This one, if I was going to recommend, if you were just getting into this, this is the one I would absolutely recommend as far as a study Bible goes, because the way this one is set up, and this is what I've been pulling articles out of and pasting into my NRSV, because I have a second copy of this that I got for cheap that I have decimated. And I just keep pulling pages out and copying them and pasting them into my study Bible, or into my journaling Bible rather. But there's a lot of cultural context, can't say that word. There's a lot of cultural context in this one. Enthronement in the ancient Near East. It compares Babylonian myths. It talks about archaeology. It talks about like history. What do we know about this area and how that informed what they were writing about? Why were these particular laws important in that area? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it gets into all of that stuff. There's a lot of pictures, but there's honestly just a lot of study notes. Also, the book introductions from this one are really good because they give you the historical setting of the book. They also give you the literary context. So they're like, here's what was actually going on in history at this time. And also here's the like literary style of this book. They'll talk about authorship if they know it. In fact, I think they say it here. Key concepts. Do they do that in the beginning? Let's see if they do that in like 1 Samuel. Introduction to 1 Samuel. Yeah, literary setting and historical setting. So it does that all the way through. Yeah, how the book of Job differs from ancient Near Eastern thinking. Like, it compares what is going on in that area of the world at that time, and that additional context is massively beneficial. I just realized this has like a whole bunch of misprint in this area of the book. That's interesting. I never noticed that before. Book of Hosea, demons in the Bible. I mean, like, there is a ton of stuff. The Shroud of Turin controversy. So this one is very, like, if you're interested in the history and the scholarly, which is why I was bummed I couldn't find an NRSV in this in print, but because I think that's the best combo, honestly. But this works great. I've referred to this a ton. This is probably my favorite study Bible just for, like, anchoring me in, like, what's real, if that makes sense, because this is so much based on what's actually going on. In fact, in the beginning, it was really cool. In Genesis, I pasted this out. Yeah, this article is actually pasted into my Genesis because I pulled it out of my other version. Image and likeness was really good too. But yeah, here's my flood pages. This is the same article, just out of a different version, a different copy of this. Because this is literally comparing the Babylonian flood myths to the Genesis flood myth, which is very cool to see. Historical setting of Genesis. The ziggurat section was very, very cool. There's just like, there's a bunch of really great stuff in here. So this is my actual intact copy. And then I have this kind of crappy, well, it's crappy now because I've been tearing pages out of it. This is my hardbound version that I had first. And then I started tearing this up. When I got a hold of this copy for cheap, I started literally tearing pages out of here and cutting out bits and pasting it into my journaling one. Okay. We're almost done, you guys. Almost done. Okay, so that covers all of my study Bibles. All of my Bibles. Okay, I've got a small section for kids Bibles, because I find these are just fun. But I'm going to show you. So this one, this is really great because this is actually put together by the Bible for Normal People podcast people. So Pete Enns. And I read this entire thing. It's fabulous. I actually highlighted in some spots because it said some really great stuff. But this is like Bible stories, but with actual real biblical scholarship. And that calls into question things that like sound questionable and like makes it okay for kids to be like, hey, that seems like kind of weird. Why is that happening? And like, this seems wrong. Like, it's really great, actually. Its whole premise was to basically tell Bible stories in a way that was also intellectually honest. And the contributors included Dan McClellan did a story in here. Pete Enns did a story. Yeah, here's Peter Enns, Dan McClellan. I know a bunch of these authors from more. Jared Davis I know about. I think there's another one. Anyway, this was great. But it literally does this thing where it talks about Deborah. Let's see. Rules to love by. I loved that. Oh, one of my favorite things about this was actually the fact that it begins by talking about how it starts with in the beginning. But it doesn't start with Genesis. It starts with Jeremiah. It says the one that begins where you'd least expect. And I literally wrote this. The beginning of the Bible was the Babylonian exile. Facts. I wrote #facts. Because this actually frames a lot of the biblical narrative, is that a lot of the Bible books that came before were actually written while the Israelites were in exile in Babylon. They were in subjugation. So a lot of that, there's a lot of resistance literature. And I think this places that. It's like, hey, they started telling stories about their past while they were going through this horrible thing. And so that frames, it like gave context for kids, which I thought was really great. It says, so the Bible kind of began in exile, which is why this book begins with the exile, because those questions and this experience shaped the Bibles we have today. It literally talks about oral tradition and the fact that stories were shared orally before they were written down, which can change how they're told. So anyways, this is really great. It's not like a full Bible, but it's got stories from Torah, prophets, the writings, which would be like Psalms and Proverbs and such. Apocrypha, there's just one, and it's from 2nd Maccabees, but that's still cool. Then we have Acts, Gospels, and all that kind of stuff. And there's this like QR code that kids can scan to ask questions and stuff. I just thought this was very, very well done. So this was a really enjoyable read. The next two I haven't read, but I will definitely play with them in the future. This one is the Action Bible. I believe this is based on, I'm not sure which translation this is based on, and I'm not quite sure it matters, to be honest, but this is literally graphic novel version. And I don't love this illustration style, but I do love the idea of reading some of these stories in graphic novel version. It just, I don't know, I feel like this will be a fun thing to just kind of like read through at some point. And again, it was another one that I snagged on Book Outlet for like, I don't know, $8 or something. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll grab that. And then this one I got because it's pretty. But I'm pretty sure this is by the publisher that publishes the English Standard Version, the ESV, which is the one that another one like the King James. It's not like the King James at all, but the ESV is a translation that is much more word for word. And as I understand it, the translation team is like entirely from like sort of one main school of thought, and I'm probably oversimplifying that. So I don't have any ESV translations. So this one is probably not like the kids' Bible I would recommend to somebody else, like who actually had children, but because I feel like it's probably too dogmatic and maybe has some stereotypes in here that I don't particularly love, but it's beautiful. And so I really wanted to, I don't know if I will keep this intact or if I might even just do something artistic with it, but I have flipped around in here, read a few of the stories, and they are so far for the most part pretty well done. But again, there's different narratives, and when you get into stories and retellings like this, it can get a little bit tricky to get more of that scholarly accuracy going or that non-dogmatic approach going. I would say this one I feel like has, yeah, David sins and repents. I mean, that's true, but he did some bad stuff. Yeah. This does talk about David and Bathsheba, and I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, this is for kids. Oh, actually, they did pretty good here. One time David saw a pretty woman named Bathsheba and decided he wanted her to be his wife. That might not seem so bad, except David already had too many wives and Bathsheba already had a husband. Oh, so I thought that's all it was going to say. And because David was the king, Bathsheba didn't have much choice in whether to be David's wife. That was bad too. Okay, so they actually did this pretty well. I thought Bathsheba gets a bad rap, y'all. That's all I'm saying. Anyways, so that's actually, I'm more impressed by that than I thought I would be. So I think sometimes I just get really nervous about translations that I know their team comes from a particular school of thought because I'm worried it's going to be it's not going to be expansive enough. It's not going to be open enough. But like, look how beautiful these illustrations are. Like, this is just absolutely gorgeous. And it's a far cry from that graphic novel version. It really is just a collection of stories, but there's quite a bit. What is this called? I forgot to even tell you. The biggest storybook. No, the biggest Bible storybook. I believe this one has, there should be a table of contents. Yeah. So you've got Genesis, a bunch of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. That's pretty good. There's history, poetry, prophets, gospels. Okay, so they've got a bit of everything. Acts and epistles and Revelation. So this feels pretty complete. I might actually like this more than I thought I was going to. It's always that Bathsheba thing. It usually tells you a lot about the take. Okay, anyways. These last couple things I'm going to show you are just hefty study resources. And they have been incredibly helpful to me. So I'm going to share them with you. The first is a Bible dictionary. This is the Tyndale Bible Dictionary. She is hefty. This is literally where you can look up anything, like a character name in the Bible, a location, anything, and read about it. Just like an encyclopedia. So like here's a whole section on the Lord's Supper, or John, or imputation. I don't know what that is. Herod. Ephesians. But let's say I wanted to look up Bathsheba. Why not? So if you hit a thing in the Bible and you just want to like learn more about it, this is like a book of just study notes basically. But if you go, I'm going to literally look up Bathsheba. There's no way she's not in here. Bathsheba, Uriah's wife, with whom David committed adultery and whom he later married. And then it goes on and gives an outline of who she was. But there's everything from battlement. There's literal word definitions, but most of this isn't like a dictionary in the sense that you're going to get like this word means this. It's more like an encyclopedia. I feel like a better name for this would have been the Bible Encyclopedia, but that's what that is. So this is just a handy reference tool. That's it. But my favorite resource of the moment, oh my God, it's so heavy. And I've shown this on the channel too. This is Eerdmans commentary on the Bible. Bible commentaries can be like entire, like almost like encyclopedia sets where there's like one book for every book of the, like it's insane. There's not a lot of single book commentaries out there. And this one really caught my attention. I actually got some tabs so I can tab it. This one has the apocryphal books in it, just like the NRSV does. So we've got Barak, Maccabees. I'm pretty sure we also have Sirach, Wisdom of Solomon, Esther. I think Esther's in the main one. As first Esdras, first, second, and third Maccabees. And this is crazy. I didn't know any commentary would do this. There's a whole commentary on the book of Enoch. I think it's just first Enoch, actually. I don't think it has second and third Enoch, but first Enoch is the main one that I think is worth a read if you're curious about things that happened around the Genesis time, according to the stories that were being told of the day. This is so extensive. I have a bookmark in because I'm currently reading John, as I said, and so I've been going through this for John. But like this whole section here is just John 7, 1 through 13 to here. Like the amount, like if I just were to grab, that's Judges, Joshua, Numbers, Leviticus, Exodus. This is all Genesis. It doesn't seem like a lot, but like there's a lot to unpack. Anyways, this is very good, and I found the comments very fair, and actually the book on the commentary on John has been incredibly interesting because they're really leaning into John telling the story about Jesus as a representation of Sophia, of divine feminine wisdom, and there's a lot of leaning into, I think, it talks about Sophia a lot, actually, which is really cool and has been awesome for my study. So that has been indispensable. I've been getting a ton of use out of this specifically. So I would say right now, what I'm using is this. I'm using this, what do I call this? Connecting Scripture. New Testament, a lot. The Abide. And the First Nations version. This is kind of what I'm doing for my John study right now is these. And that's on top of writing everything and reading everything in my NRSV. So, y'all, oh my God. So this was my like 2-hour roundup of all of my stuff. And I know I missed things. I know I kind of like went down rabbit holes, but like you're looking at like 2.5 years, 2 years, maybe closer to 2 years of just constant study and reading. And a lot of these things are things that like were trial and error. Like I knew that this was really, really useful, but as far as like my other studies, like this one, like a lot of these study Bibles just sit until I need them. Like these aren't all things I'm trying to like use all the time. What I would say is that it's really great to pick one good study Bible and then just be in that for a while. And I think if you're looking for one good study Bible that's really comprehensive, especially if you're just dipping your toes in, I would definitely recommend the cultural backgrounds because it is not about, the notes are not about like application. They're not about like religion. They're about history and context and culture. And so the kind of study Bible you get will completely change the kind of notes you get under the text. So if you're reading it, you want something that's going to give you the kind of notes that are going to be in alignment with what your study is. So if you're somebody who's just dipping your toes in and you want to kind of de-dogmatic, or like you want to deconstruct, you want to get some of the dogma and the old programming out of what you're reading, this one has been really, really great for that. So I would say if I had to like recommend a few things to start with, I would say get yourself a copy of the NRSV updated edition. There are a couple study Bibles. There's the SBL study Bible. I haven't read it. I've heard it's like really bad quality. Like it's hard to read because the pages ghost, like they're very thin. So I haven't picked it up yet, but I've heard the articles in it are really, really good. So that would be one you could consider, or this cultural backgrounds, but get yourself an NRSV UE or look one up online. Get a copy of cultural backgrounds. You can get the NRSV version of this on Kindle, I believe, but you have to use it like on like a tablet, I think. I would get that. And then I would also recommend one of these two books, either Reading the Bible Again for the First Time by Marcus J. Borg or Better Ways to Read the Bible by Zach Lambert. Just to kind of give you context for how to dip in and how to have a good lens for reading the text. I would definitely recommend one of those. If you are curious and want to dip into the Jesus story, I would consider reading The Universal Christ. I felt like this was a very healing book. If you're drawn to work with Jesus or the Christ, this would be a great place to like explore. But if you're just looking to like maybe dip your toes into reading some Bible text, I would say pick up one of these two books, pick up a good translation like the NRSV UE. And if you want to get a study Bible, Cultural Backgrounds. These were like my main go-tos when I first started. And I think without the right kind of guide, again, this really, 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 really helped. Without the right kind of guide, I feel like I would have been like, hell no, I'm out of here. Like so quick in the beginning. So setting that sort of tone and understanding that you get to decide, it made all the difference for me. So that's what I would say about that. I hope some of this was helpful. If anything, I hope it sated your curiosity about my insane special interest rabbit holing. But I will say this, everything I have been studying, reading, doing has brought me, I feel, so much closer to truth and so much further from all the dogma and harmful rhetoric I was like exposed to when I was younger. And I feel so much more healed on the other side of this, and I'm still doing it, but like I feel like I have such a healthy relationship with all of this stuff where I feel like I'm able to form my own thoughts, I'm able to form my own beliefs. I feel like I'm coming at things in a way where I feel educated. I feel like I can look at a book in context and look at an entire message and not just like hear a soundbite and go, oh, that's what the people that fall under this umbrella believe. Instead, I can like form my own thoughts, and like I feel very armed with information in a way that is really reassuring. And to me, that's been part of the benefit of all of this. But the other part of it has been discovering that what I thought I knew about the divine was true all along. And I just let other people tell me that it wasn't. And so that's been a lot of what this has been about for me, is like reclaiming and rediscovering and coming home again to all of that. So I hope some of this was helpful. I feel like it was a pretty big info dump, but I wanted one place to kind of park all of this, and I'm sure there'll be other things here and there that will pop up. I don't know how much more I'll have to say on this subject, just because for me, it's just a very much a personal journey and an ongoing journey. But if this is something you've been looking to dip into, I hope some of this has given you some things to think about or consider or explore that feel like they're maybe not so intimidating. And if you have questions, I'm happy to try to answer them down below. Just remember, I'm not an expert. I would definitely recommend doing your homework, reading up. If you're curious about translations, reading about those, read about who's on the translation team and like what their agenda may or may not be. Like that kind of stuff can be really helpful. But I hope this was helpful. And again, if you missed part 1 of this whole thing, then go check that out. That'll be linked down below, unlike anything else in this video. But I hope this was helpful, and thank you all for hanging out with me. Thank you for your interest, and most of all, just thank you for being very kind and accepting about all this. I was fully expecting people to freak out, and while I'm sure some people have been like, ma'am, no, I'm out of here. I get it, because I was there too for a long, long time. But for everybody that's been able to go, no, like, we know your heart, like, we know you're not going to, like, turn into some crazy lady. I appreciate you. Thank you for believing in me. And hopefully seeing that I have all of this, and that I'm still me, has helped to reassure any of you who are concerned, because I'm very much still holding all the same things. And there's some really interesting, fun side quest topics you can get into around, like, I don't know, aliens and like reincarnation and stuff that's in all of this too. If you like let yourself allow that sort of thing, if you explore where that could be mentioned, there's some really interesting things about all kinds of things. There's all kinds of like interesting rabbit holes. I'm going to shut up because I've been here a bazillion hours and I need to go to bed, but I will do my best to edit this. It's still going to be a hot mess. I really wanted it to be organized, and I don't know that it was in the end, but again, I hope it was helpful. Thanks for hanging out. This is the longest goodbye ever. Until next time, may your magic always shine from the inside out. Bye!